She was building a cabin with broken branches. The Alpha King watched, then descended with packed timber. The forest around her was alive with whispers, wind through leaves, the distant cry of a hawk, and the subtle rustle of unseen creatures. Every sound reminded her that she was alone here, far from the kingdom ruled by fear and shadow. She had chosen solitude, building a cabin with her own hands, far from the prying eyes of nobles and kings who measured worth by power and titles. The branches were weak, splintering under her grip, but she pressed on. Each beam she laid felt like a small victory over the world that had taken so much from her. She had lost her family to a hunt led by the Alpha King, the ruler of the northern wilds, a man whose name was spoken in fear and awe. People said he was merciless, that he commanded not just men but the forest itself, and that nothing could escape the reach of his pack. Yet here she was, building a cabin from broken branches as if the world could not touch her. Her hands bled slightly and she ignored the sting. Sweat ran down her forehead, mixing with the dirt and ash of the fallen leaves around her. She paused for a moment, leaning on the rough wood, catching her breath. Her green eyes scanned the forest, alert for any sign of danger, but the forest offered nothing but shadows and silence. Then, without warning, she felt it, a presence. Not in the wind, not in the rustling leaves, but watching her. She froze, a shiver crawling down her spine. Her hands loosened their grip on the branches as she slowly turned her head. At first, she saw nothing. The trees swayed gently, shadows dancing across the forest floor. But then, from high above in the canopy, two glowing eyes watched her. Ilara's heart beat faster. She had heard the stories of the Alpha King, of how he could appear silently, without warning. And now, she realized she was not alone. The figure stepped forward with a fluid grace that made the earth itself seem to bend under his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that made the trees feel smaller around him. His hair, dark as the night sky, fell to his shoulders, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. He was the Alpha King. He had come to her, but why? Ilara's first instinct was to flee, to abandon the cabin and disappear into the forest. But something in his gaze held her in place, a strange mixture of curiosity and admiration that made her hesitate. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. He said nothing at first. He watched her, the shadows of the forest falling across his face like a living cloak. Then he stepped down from the trees with a movement that seemed almost supernatural. In his hands he carried timber, not ordinary wood but strong, perfect pieces, straight and smooth, as if crafted by the forest itself. He placed them gently beside her cabin, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let me help," he said finally, his voice deep, calm, and commanding. Ilara blinked, uncertain. Pride warred with instinct. She had survived alone this long. She didn't need anyone, especially not him. And yet, there was something in the way he moved, in the strength he carried so naturally, that made her want to accept the help. "Why?" she asked, suspicion threading through her words. "Because you fight like the forest itself fights," he replied. "Because you do not beg, because you do not hide." His gaze softened just slightly, just enough to make her wonder if there was more to him than the stories. Ilara swallowed hard. There was fear, yes, but there was also curiosity. She nodded once sharply and returned to her work. He watched her for a moment longer, then began to place the timber, aligning it with the broken branches she had already tied. His movements were precise, careful, as if he understood the forest's rhythm better than any human could. Hours passed in silence. Ilara worked alongside him, their hands brushing occasionally as they lifted beams together. Each touch sent a small spark through her chest, a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Kale, the Alpha King, observed her closely, noting the way she moved, how her muscles tensed when she lifted a heavy branch, how her eyes never lost focus even when exhaustion pulled at her limbs. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to her. "I survive," she replied, her voice steady, but her chest rose and fell with exertion. The forest grew darker as the sun sank below the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the cabin, and the sounds of night began to stir. Small creatures rustled in the underbrush, and distant calls echoed between the trees. Alara felt a familiar tension rise in her chest, the kind she had carried since she was a child, the tension of knowing danger was never far. Kale seemed to sense it too. He moved closer, his presence both protective and overwhelming. He placed a hand on a beam, steadying it as she tied it into place. For a moment their eyes met, and Alara saw something in him she hadn't expected: respect. Not just respect, but recognition. "You are not afraid," he said. "I have to be," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "The forest does not forgive weakness." He nodded slowly, as if agreeing but also understanding something deeper. There was a pause, a shared moment of understanding between two creatures of the wild, both shaped by hardship and solitude. Then came the first sign of danger. A low rustle, almost imperceptible, moved through the underbrush. Alara tensed, her hand moving to the dagger at her belt. Kale's eyes narrowed. He stepped in front of her, his body blocking the shadow that moved closer. "Not yet," he said softly, almost a whisper, and the rustle stopped. Alara relaxed slightly but kept her guard up. She realized then that this man, the Alpha King, was not just powerful. He was connected to the forest in a way that she could not yet understand, able to sense the creatures and the spirits that moved within it. Night fell fully, and the cabin began to take shape. Broken branches and fresh timber formed the walls, and a small hearth stood in the center, waiting for fire. Alara's muscles ached, but she felt a strange satisfaction in what they had accomplished together. Kale stood nearby, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the clearing, ever vigilant. "You could have built this alone," she said finally, her voice carrying both pride and hesitation. "Yes," he replied, "but it would not have been as strong. It would not have been alive." His gaze softened once more, and Alara felt a pull in her chest she did not understand. The fire she lit crackled and danced, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Kale sat beside her, close enough to feel his presence, far enough to respect her space. They did not speak, yet the silence was not empty. It was filled with understanding, with tension, with something unspoken that hung between them like a delicate thread. Then a sudden wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper that made Alara's blood run cold. The branches outside the cabin shivered violently, and the fire flickered as if a dark hand had passed over it. Kale's eyes glowed faintly and he rose to his feet, moving to the edge of the clearing. "It knows you are here," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. Alara's heart raced. "What knows me?" "The forest and more," Kale replied. "There are forces that watch, that test those who dare build in these woods. You are strong, but you are new. The forest does not forgive mistakes." Alara nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the cabin wall. Fear mixed with determination in her chest. She had survived this long, and she would survive this night too. But she realized, with a shiver, that she was not alone in the fight. Kale returned to her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. She felt the warmth of him, the strength, and the silent promise that he would not let harm come to her. For the first time in a long while, Alara allowed herself a moment of trust, fragile but real. The cabin, imperfect and built from broken branches, now felt like a sanctuary, not just from the forest but from the weight of her own past. But the forest did not sleep, and the night held secrets yet to reveal. As she looked up at Kale, she saw the flicker of something dangerous and powerful in his eyes, a storm beneath his calm exterior. She realized then that he was not just a protector. He was a force of nature, a king, and perhaps a danger all at once. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and something darker, she understood the truth. This night was only the beginning. Something had awakened, drawn to her, to the cabin, to them. Alara shivered not from cold but from the thrill and fear of what was to come. She glanced at Kale, who stood silently beside her, timber in his hands and strength in his stance. "It has found you," he said, almost a whisper, "but not yet me." Her heart caught in her throat. She had thought she could survive alone. She had thought the forest was her only companion. But now she understood. She was part of a story much larger, one that would test her courage, her heart, and her very soul. And in the shadows beyond the firelight, the forest waited, watching and breathing, alive with secrets yet untold. The night pressed heavily against the forest, thick with mist and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Alara lay awake in the small cabin, listening to the faint rustle of leaves outside, the distant calls of creatures she could not name. She had thought the forest would be her sanctuary, her refuge from fear, from loss. But now she realized it was alive, watching and judging. And with it, a new presence had entered her life, Kale, the Alpha King. She felt him before she saw him, a shadow at the edge of the firelight, moving silently, almost merging with the darkness itself. He was restless, alert, as if he could sense everything the forest hid. Alara could not help but study him, her curiosity mixing with unease. "Do you sleep?" she asked softly, trying not to let her tension show. Kale turned his head, the faint glow of his eyes catching the firelight. "Sleep is a luxury in these woods," he replied, his voice low and calm. "The forest does not forgive carelessness." Alara swallowed. She understood the meaning behind his words. Every branch, every shadow, every sound could hide danger. But she also understood that the danger was not only outside. It was in the forest, yes, but also in him. Kale was strength and command, yes, but there was something darker, something untamed, and she could feel it pulling at her curiosity as much as at her caution. She rose quietly and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face. The firelight from the cabin flickered, casting dancing shadows across the ground. Kale followed without a sound, his presence like a shadow moving with her. "The forest is alive," he said after a moment, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "It senses strength, it tests those who enter, and it will not forgive weakness." "I have been tested before," she said, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "I have survived what most would not endure." He regarded her carefully, the corners of his eyes narrowing. "And yet here you are, building a cabin with broken branches, alone. You challenge the forest and perhaps you challenge me." Alara's heart skipped. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her tremble, a power that drew her despite the caution she had always carried. She took a step closer to the firelight, feeling the warmth brush her face, and for a moment the world seemed smaller, less threatening. Kale's eyes followed her, his posture both protective and commanding. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly. She hesitated. Trust had been a foreign word in her life for years. Her family was gone, her world shattered. She had learned to rely on no one but herself. And yet, there was something about him that made her consider it just slightly. I don't know," she admitted. "That is honest," he said, "and honesty is stronger than any weapon." They returned to the cabin together, and Kale began to help her fortify the walls. He taught her how to interlock the timber with the broken branches, how to make the structure more stable, more permanent. His hands were strong, steady, and his movements precise, yet there was a gentleness in his instruction that she had not expected. As they worked, Alara felt a subtle change in the air. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, as if aware that two human souls were working together in defiance of its dark will. Kale moved beside her, guiding her hands, correcting her angles, and at times their fingers brushed. Each time it happened, a spark ran through her, a mix of fear and fascination. "You are stronger than you realize," Kale said, his voice near her ear as he adjusted a beam. The warmth of his breath brushed against her skin, and braver than most who enter these woods. "I survive," she said, meeting his gaze, "and I endure." He studied her for a long moment, as if measuring not just her strength but her heart, her spirit. The forest may test you, but it will not break you, not while you carry that fire. Hours passed. The cabin began to resemble a shelter rather than a pile of wood and branches. The walls stood sturdier, the roof supported by both broken branches and Cale's expertly placed timber. The fire in the hearth cast a warm glow, illuminating their work. But the forest, alive and ancient, had not forgotten them. A sudden chill swept through the clearing and the fire flickered violently. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting and writhing as if reaching toward the cabin. Alara froze, sensing the forest's intent. Cale tensed beside her, his eyes glowing faintly, scanning the dark. "The Wraith of the Hollow," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It watches those who build here. It feeds on fear and doubt. You have awakened it." Alara's stomach tightened. She had heard whispers of the Wraith, a spectral force that haunted the northern wilds, devouring the ambition and hope of those who dared challenge the forest's will. "What does it want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not you yet," Cale said, stepping protectively closer. "It seeks weakness. It will test us both." The wind howled suddenly, carrying with it the faintest of whispers, her name, spoken as if from everywhere at once. Alara shivered, her hands gripping a branch tightly. Cale's eyes narrowed and he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear," he said. "Fear is what it feeds on. Stand with me. Trust your strength." Alara nodded, drawing on the courage that had carried her this far. She met Cale's eyes and saw something she had not expected: vulnerability. Despite his power, he carried a weight, a history of battles and burdens that mirrored her own in ways she could not yet name. And yet he stood strong, unwavering, a pillar she could lean on if she allowed herself. The Wraith moved closer, a shadow stretching along the edge of the clearing. The fire flickered again, and for a moment the darkness seemed to pulse with intent. Alara felt the cold touch of fear brush against her, but she steadied herself, gripping the timber she had helped place. Cale placed himself in front of her, his presence immense and commanding. "It will not touch you while I stand," he said, his voice firm, filled with both authority and care. They worked together, moving to secure the cabin as the shadows crept closer. Cale's strength and knowledge of the forest combined with her ingenuity and determination. The cabin, once fragile and broken, now seemed alive, a small fortress against the dark. As they labored, their hands met again, fingers intertwining briefly. Alara felt warmth and connection, a spark that made her pulse quicken. She had not expected companionship, not here, not now, yet the feeling was undeniable. Cale met her gaze, and for a moment words were unnecessary. Their shared effort, their combined strength had built more than a cabin. It had built trust, fragile but growing. Suddenly, a deep growl rumbled through the forest, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The Wraith had revealed itself fully, a shadowy figure with eyes like hollow flames. It hovered at the edge of the clearing, its presence heavy, oppressive. Cale stepped forward, placing himself fully between Alara and the darkness. "Stand behind me," he commanded, his voice carrying the power of the forest itself. Alara obeyed, her heart racing, yet she did not shrink. She gripped a branch, ready to defend what they had built together. She realized then that strength was not just physical, it was courage, determination, and the willingness to face fear. The Wraith hovered closer, its form flickering like smoke, testing them, seeking weakness. Cale's eyes glowed, and he called upon the energy of the forest, his voice rising in a low chant. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if startled by his command. Alara watched in awe, seeing the Alpha King not as a distant figure of fear but as a protector, a being connected to the wild in ways she had never imagined. He was strength and power, yes, but also honor and restraint. And she felt something stir within her, a bond forming that neither fear nor darkness could sever. The shadow retreated slowly, as if sensing that their unity was stronger than its hunger. Cale exhaled, tension leaving his body, though his gaze never wavered from the dark forest beyond. "It will return," he said quietly, turning to her. "The forest tests those its senses are strong. It tests those it fears might challenge it." Alara nodded, her hands still gripping the timber. "Then we will be ready," she said, her voice steady. Kale studied her, his expression softening. "Yes, together." For the first time, Alara felt a sense of belonging, not just to the cabin or the forest, but to a moment, to a connection that transcended fear and darkness. And yet, as the night deepened, she could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the forest, and perhaps the Alpha King himself, held secrets yet to be revealed. They returned to the cabin, tending the fire and strengthening the walls. The forest outside whispered, alive with unseen eyes, and Alara realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer alone, and neither was the Alpha King. But as they settled near the hearth, a shadow detached itself from the trees, moving silently, watching. Kale's eyes flicked toward it, and he murmured almost to himself, "The wraith is patient, and so are its lessons." Alara felt a chill, but it was not fear alone. It was anticipation, curiosity, and the thrill of facing darkness alongside someone who had become more than a stranger, more than a king, someone who might become a partner in strength and in spirit. The night stretched on, filled with quiet whispers, the crackle of fire, and the steady presence of two hearts bound by circumstance, courage, and the slow, rising spark of something neither had expected. And somewhere beyond the trees, the wraith lingered, knowing that the story had only begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, casting slivers of gold across the cabin's wooden walls. Alara stirred, feeling the crisp air brush her face, and for a moment she let herself savor the calm. The forest was quiet now, but the memory of the wraith's shadow lingered in her mind, a reminder that their fight was far from over. Kale was already awake, standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the forest with the vigilance of a king guarding his realm. He had slept little, the weight of the forest and its hidden dangers pressing against him as he always did. Yet when he turned toward her and saw her stirring, a faint, rare softness appeared in his eyes. "You rest well?" he asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of one accustomed to command. "I slept enough," Alara said, stretching, feeling the aches from yesterday's labor in her arms and back. "The forest, it is not kind, but neither am I." Kale allowed a small smile, the first she had ever seen from him that was not tinged with shadow or caution. "That is why it respects you." They worked together to reinforce the cabin's walls with additional timber and broken branches, each movement precise and synchronized, almost like a dance. Every touch, every glance carried unspoken tension. Alara felt her pulse quicken when their hands brushed, and Kale, in turn, seemed caught off guard by the subtle spark of connection he had not expected. By midday, the cabin stood firm, a testament to both of their strengths. Yet as they admired their work, the forest shifted. The wind carried a chill that prickled at the skin, and shadows stretched unnaturally between the trees. Alara felt the same tension she had felt before. The wraith was near, testing, probing. Kale's eyes darkened, and he moved to the edge of the clearing, senses alert. "It comes," he said simply. "The forest tests those it cannot break easily, and the wraith knows you are not alone." Alara gripped a branch, her pulse steady despite the fear creeping through her chest. "Then we face it," she said, determination threading her words. "Together." Kale regarded her, his eyes softening. "Together," he echoed, and for the first time there was no shadow of doubt in his voice. As the sun dipped behind thick clouds, the wraith appeared. It was a living shadow, flickering and twisting, with eyes like hollow fire and tendrils of darkness that whispered threats only the forest understood. The very air seemed heavy with its presence. Kale stepped forward, his body taut and commanding, a barrier between the wraith and Alara. "Stand behind me," he said, though she did not hesitate. She planted herself firmly beside him, gripping a sturdy branch as if it were a weapon forged by her own will. The wraith hissed, a sound that seemed to pierce the forest itself. Shadows surged around them, seeking weakness, seeking fear. Kale's eyes glowed faintly, and he called upon the forest energy. The ground beneath them vibrated with the hum of ancient power. Trees bent subtly, leaves swirling in patterns that shielded the cabin from the wraith's full force. Alara felt the forest's energy flowing through her, too. She realized that her strength was not just in her arms, nor Kale's power solely in his command. It was in their unity, the combination of courage and trust. Together, they formed a force the wraith could not easily breach. "Do not let it see doubt," Kale instructed, his voice a steady anchor. "Fear feeds it, strength drives it back." Alara nodded, drawing deep breaths, feeling the pulse of the forest mingling with her own heartbeat. She stood tall, unwavering, and with Kale at her side she felt invincible. The wraith surged forward, a wave of shadow crashing against the light of their fire and the energy Kale channeled. Alara lifted her branch, and in a gesture she did not fully understand, she felt the forest respond, the wood glowing faintly, imbued with an ancient, protective force. She swung it toward the wraith, not to harm but to push, and the shadow recoiled, shrieking in frustration. Kale moved beside her, commanding the forest itself to rise. Roots and vines twisted and stretched, forming barriers and guiding the shadows back. The wraith shrieked, twisting and contorting, but it could not break their unity. "You are stronger than it knew," Kale said, his voice carrying pride as he glanced at her. "And braver than I imagined." Alara felt warmth in her chest, a rare satisfaction that came not from triumph alone, but from connection, from standing together with someone who respected her strength and spirit. "We protect each other," she said simply. "Yes," Kale replied, his eyes softening. For the first time he allowed himself to show the man beneath the king, the one capable of tenderness. That is the difference. The wraith, sensing it could not win, recoiled fully and dissolved into mist, retreating deeper into the forest. The air lightened, and a calm settled over the clearing, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Alara lowered her branch, chest heaving, and looked at Kale. He stood tall, his form a mixture of power and quiet relief. She realized then that she was no longer just a survivor. She was part of something larger, something alive, something that demanded courage, trust, and heart. Kale turned to her, and for the first time his full attention was on her alone. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You are remarkable," he said softly, almost reverently. "You face danger without begging, without faltering, and yet you do not stand alone." Alara felt her pulse quicken, her breath catching. I could not," she admitted. "Not with you here, not with the strength you give." A small smile tugged at Kale's lips. "Then we will face whatever comes next together, always." They returned to the cabin, tending the fire and reinforcing the walls, but now their work had a different rhythm. There was laughter between them, quiet moments of shared effort, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every touch, every glance. The sun rose, casting light through the canopy and illuminating the cabin. For the first time, Alara felt the forest not as a place of danger, but as a living entity that could be respected and perhaps understood. Kale moved beside her, teaching her the ways of the forest, how to read its subtle signs, how to anticipate its moods. Days passed in this rhythm. The cabin grew stronger, more permanent. Alara learned to move with Kale, to feel the energy of the forest, and to trust her instincts. In return, Kale revealed glimpses of the man behind the alpha mask, memories of his past, the weight of his lineage, the loneliness of command. Each revelation brought them closer, a bridge forming between two hearts that had known isolation for far too long. One evening, as the sky turned shades of violet and gold, Kale led her to the top of a small hill overlooking the forest. "Look," he said, his voice soft, yet carrying the weight of authority. Alara followed his gaze, and below them the forest stretched endlessly, alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds returning to roost. It was beautiful, serene, yet she could feel the power lurking in every shadow, the life pulsing beneath the soil and bark. "This forest is not cruel," Kale said. "It is demanding. It asks for respect, courage, and strength. Those who meet it with honesty and heart, it honors them." Alara looked at him, seeing not just the king, not just the alpha, but a man capable of love, trust, and sacrifice. "And what of the wraith?" she asked. "It will come again," Kale admitted, "but it will find us ready." Together, their eyes met, and in that moment all barriers fell away. The tension, the fear, the shadows of their pasts, they melted into something new. Kale reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for the first time their connection was not just of trust and survival, but of something deeper, more enduring. Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest, a gentle flame that matched the firelight in the cabin. "I never thought I would find this," she whispered. "Nor I," Kale replied, his voice low, resonant, and filled with emotion. "But perhaps some things are meant to be found, not sought." The forest seemed to sigh around them, the trees leaning slightly as if acknowledging the bond forged in fire, timber, and shadow. For the first time, Alara felt that she belonged, not just to the cabin, not just to herself, but to a story larger than her fear, larger than the forest, larger than even the Alpha King himself. And yet, as they returned to the cabin, safe in each other's presence, a faint rustle sounded from the far edge of the clearing. The wraith lingered, patient and unseen, reminding them that the forest's tests were never fully complete. Kale's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it as one. No fear, no hesitation, together." Alara nodded, gripping his hand, feeling the power, the protection, and the trust that had grown between them. The wraith could wait. The forest could test them again. But for now they had survived, and in surviving, they had found something neither expected: connection, courage, and the promise of a future that neither solitude nor shadow could take from them. And as the cabin glowed in the fading light, standing firm against the forest's dark embrace, Alara realized that even in a world of danger and curses, hope, courage, and love could thrive. The forest whispered its approval, leaves rustling in quiet harmony. But from the shadows the wraith observed, patient and eternal. Kale and Alara, hand in hand, did not flinch. They were ready for whatever came next.